Last week, the Dutch government announced that Schiphol Amsterdam Airport was forced to cut 12% of its annual capacity. So, what led to this decision, and what will be the impacts on aviation in Europe? Let's talk aviation. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and makes it easier for others to find. Schiphol Airport was in 2019 the third largest airport in the world by passenger numbers, having 71 million annual passengers, and finishing only behind Dubai and London Heathrow. Furthermore, it was the 9th largest by aircraft movements. The airport will, at least for the foreseeable future, never be as large as before the pandemic. In 2019, the airport was allowed to have up to 500,000 aircraft movements and used each and every slot. But by the end of 2023, no more than 440,000 movements are allowed, meaning that 1 in 8 flights have to be cut. The Dutch Secretary for Infrastructure, Mark Harbers, announced at a press conference that the decision wasn't taken lightly, and that there were two main factors that played a role in the decision. The Netherlands, being the Netherlands, have one of the world's largest airports relatively close to large population centers, and for years there have been discussions on how the airport has a negative effect on its surroundings. First of all, there is the obvious noise pollution, keeping citizens awake at night. Not only noise pollution played a big role, but also air pollution. Planes emit large quantities of ultrafine particles that can get deep in the lungs and cause respiratory and heart disease. Given that there are large population centers close to the airport, this is cause for concern. And last but not least, there is the emission of nitrogen. In the Netherlands, there are especially high levels of nitrogen pollution, and this has already forced the government to lower the speed limit on highways and limit the allowed livestock on farms. High levels of nitrogen reduce biodiversity and have a devastating effect on wild animals and plants. And by law, the country is now not allowed to build new homes in the middle of a housing crisis or perform necessary maintenance to road infrastructure until measures have been taken to reduce the emission of nitrogen. Back to Schiphol. When the new cabinet presented its plans at the beginning of the year, there were talks of controlled growth for the airport to 540,000 yearly movements and up to 650,000 in the following decades. But instead of growth, the airport is now forced to shrink. Next to the obvious effects of less route options and lower frequencies, what other effects might we see in the near future? One man's loss is the other man's gain, and although Schiphol was Europe's largest airport, some of the other contenders are quite close to Schiphol. London, Paris and Frankfurt are now prime contenders to take over the flights that are no longer welcome in Amsterdam. One airline that will be hit hard by the measures is KLM. The airline and its subsidiaries Transavia and Martinair had about 286,000 flights at the airport in 2019, or almost 60% of all capacity. While all airlines will be forced to hand in some of their slots, in absolute terms, KLM will be the biggest loser, not only because they have to cut flights, but also because their main competitors can grow at other airports in Europe. Within the Air France KLM holding, this will mean that Air France may take over some of KLM's destinations, and that KLM will be marginalized to a regional player and feeder airline to Air France. Luckily, the airline has an ace up its sleeve to dampen the effects on its passenger numbers. With its recent choice for the A320neo family to replace their aging 737s, the airline will get the option to use the A320neo with 227 seats on its most popular routes, instead of the largest plane right now, the 737-900 with a capacity of just 178 seats. So on the highest frequency routes, the airline could decide to cut some in favor for fewer flights with larger planes. This is also what the airline said in a response to the decision of the Dutch government, that they will cut the number of destinations, especially in Europe, and that they would focus more on higher density routes in order to fill larger planes. This would almost certainly mean the end of the fleet of Embraer planes that currently fly around Europe. What are your thoughts about Schiphol being forced to downsize? Do you think the airport can cope? Or will other players take over the role of Schiphol? What would you do if you were the president of KLM? Keep the network intact as much as possible, albeit with lower frequencies? Or should the airline focus on a limited number of specific markets? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and please consider subscribing to Let's Talk Aviation.